after this tier, we're kind of in the boring yet valuable, strict pocket passer tier. You know, guys like Stafford, Kirk, Rodgers, Derek Carr. I mean, you know, these are guys that I think are boring to a certain extent, but they're always going to be valuable in fantasy. They're always probably going to be in that mix to be bottom end QB1s, finish, you know, quarterback 9 to quarterback 13. They probably won't finish too highly above that, but they probably won't finish very far below that either.
I think this is just the tier of quarterbacks where it's like I'm strictly drafting them for stacks. Obviously, you're not drafting them as standalone quarterbacks like a Lamar or a Kyler or Jalen Hurts. So yeah, I'm really only looking to target these guys if I have Kupp or A-Rob for Stafford, or if I have Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen for Kirk Cousins. But I think my hot take is that Kirk Cousins will be, you know, the quarterback out of this range that could potentially finish top 6, top 7, just with kind of the rhetoric that's coming out of Minnesota and how they could trend more pass heavy this year, and the skill position players there are obviously phenomenal with the 2 wide receivers I mentioned, and Dalvin Cook and Irv Smith at tight end, and they still have KJ Osborne as a capable wide receiver 3. So if they let Kirk air it out, I think he definitely has a chance at a higher ceiling than we've seen. He averaged 19 points per game last year. I think we could get him up to, you know, over 20 plus points per game if they let him air the ball out a little bit more. So my hot take is Kirk Cousins could potentially finish as, you know, a top 6, top 7 quarterback out of this range, and I think he's really the only one, to be honest.
Definitely agree with you. Last year was kind of Stafford who was getting drafted in this range, who went off and had just an exceptional year and finished in the top 7 at the quarterback position when it was all said and done, and he threw 41 touchdowns. Now Kirk gets Kevin O'Connell, who was in LA last year with Stafford, bringing some of that offensive theory here. They get rid of Mike Zimmer, who was just an ancient run the ball, you know, establish the run type coach. Now they get the guy who produced Cooper Kupp, going to put Justin Jefferson in that role, and I'm really excited for Kirk as well. I've got him as my quarterback 12. So I'm definitely right there with you on Kirk and the potential upside if this offense does go more pass heavy. I think my hot take in this range is that I'm just flat out not drafting Aaron Rodgers. You know, he's going as the quarterback 13. You've got him ranked at 14, and I have him ranked at 17. And ranked at 17, I'm just never going to get Aaron Rodgers. We've talked about it at length, but I just think that the loss of Devontae Adams is going to shift the entire way that this offense operates. I think their best 2 skill position players are the running backs. It's going to be Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon essentially carrying this offense. Rodgers will still be efficient. He'll be, an effective quarterback without a doubt, but I just don't see the same level of touchdowns coming for him as a passer. I think they shift a lot more run heavy, especially in the red zone. So for that reason, I'll prefer guys like Derek Carr, who I think will be in a lot of shootouts in a tough division. Obviously gets Devontae Adams himself, and then even a couple guys like Justin Fields for the rushing upside, and Tua for his potential with a new coach and upgraded weapons in Tyreek Hill. I'm pretty much off Rodgers, and I'm going to be taking shots on guys who are a little shakier, but I think do have higher upside just based off situation.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Obviously, Rodgers is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL from a talent perspective, and ultimately has the upside to finish as a top quarterback, but I think just the skill position players are just so bad that ultimately for me the ceiling just isn't there. And you know what I would compare it to? I would compare it to 2019 Tom Brady. Tom Brady's last season with the Patriots, when they surrounded him with literally no weapons. And Tom Brady in that year finished as the quarterback 12 in total points, and even worse than that in points per game. He only averaged 16.98 points per game in 2019. So I think that's what this Rodgers situation kind of reminds me of this year. And, no matter how great the quarterback is, you still need talent at your other positions to help your quarterback score fantasy points, right? Obviously, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon is one of the, the top running back duos in the league. So that should help quite a bit. And, we'll talk about them quite a bit for our running back rankings. But just the wide receiver core is so uninspiring. Obviously, Robert Tonyan is there at tight end. He's okay. But I just think for those reasons, you got to rank Rodgers a little bit lower. And Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings have him as the quarterback 12, so we are a little bit lower than the consensus on Rodgers. I just think that the ceiling is just not there with the players that he's going to be throwing the ball to this year.
Yeah, I'm personally shocked that he's going above Kirk Cousins right now. I mean, just for all the reasons that we talked about. It's interesting, and again, it's not a comment on his skill. Obviously, from a pure talent perspective, Rodgers is a top 5 quarterback in the league still. But like you said, just going back to the 2019 Brady thing, you need to be in a situation where you either have talent or you have a ton of volume. And I think Rodgers has neither of those things. That's not to say that he can't have another good year in his career. That was 2019 for Brady. Fast forward to 2021, and he's quarterback 3 again. He's elite because he's passing the ball, and they surrounded him with elite weapons. So maybe they do that with Rodgers next year, and we're having a different conversation. But for this year, I think the situation is just too grim for him. So I will be hands off Aaron Rodgers in almost all situations. So after the Fields Tua cutoff, you've got Daniel Jones all the way up at quarterback 17. His ADP is 21. I have him ranked at 22, so I'm a little bit lower, and you're quite a bit higher on Daniel Jones, which is no surprise to people who have been listening to the podcast over the past couple of months. If you want to reiterate for the people why you're high on Daniel Jones and this Giants offense this season.
Yeah, so I think that after Derek Carr, for me, there is a tier break there. So I just want to say that. So it stands right now, I have Tua as my QB 16, Daniel Jones as my quarterback 17, Trevor Lawrence as my quarterback 18, and Justin Fields as my quarterback 19. And I think that would be a tier for me. So the reason that I have Daniel Jones above Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, basically going against the consensus pretty heavily here, is that, in my opinion, he's just in a better situation. I think that the overall offensive environment and skill position players are significantly better than in Chicago, and I think they are also better than Jacksonville by, a little bit at least, with Saquon and Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Ricky Seals-Jones, and then just the massive coaching upgrade going from, Joe Judge and Jason Garrett over the last 2 years to Brian Daboll, who led the Bills to back-to-back top 3 offensive finishes. And ultimately, I think he's going to let Daniel Jones just go crazy and go wild and, kind of be that Josh Allen-esque player where they're just going to use him in both facets of the game, in the passing game and in the rushing game. And I think Daniel Jones out of this tier has, hot take, maybe the highest rushing upside, even over Justin Fields. Daniel Jones averaged 27 yards per game, maybe not more than Justin Fields. Maybe that's too hot of a take, but he's definitely up there in the NFL. He had 62 attempts. He had 27 rushing yards per game, 2 rushing touchdowns. Obviously, touchdowns are a little bit of variance. 298 rushing yards. So he was top 10 in pretty much every rushing category for quarterbacks in only 11 games. So if we add 6 games worth of stats on to Daniel Jones, I think he's a borderline top 5 rushing quarterback in the league. So then when you combine that with just the overall upgrade in offensive efficiency, most likely, I mean, it's going to be hard to repeat what they've done over the last 2 seasons. I'm pretty sure they've scored the least amount of touchdowns out of any team over the last 2 years. I think that changes this year. Obviously, I'm just higher on the Giants than most, and Daniel Jones, I think, could be in for a very, very good fantasy year. And the situation for me is just a tiebreaker over a guy like Justin Fields that really has nobody on that offense. And the Bears could be one of the worst teams in the league. And it's definitely a hot take, but I have him over Trevor Lawrence as well.
Yeah, that's a hot take. I could see that happening. I do have to correct you when you say that the Bears have nobody. They have Darnell Mooney, and Mooney's going to finish quite a bit higher than any wide receiver on the Giants.
I mean, I think the reason he finishes higher is because there's nobody else on the team that will compete for touches and opportunity. So
true. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Mooney guy, and again, I don't want to sell Justin Fields' rushing upside short either. He did have almost 450 yards in only 12 games as a rookie. So, I mean, I like Justin Fields' rushing upside a little bit more than you. I've got him ranked at QB 15 for you. He's all the way down at 19. So that's, I guess, our big difference is you're higher on Jones. I'm a little higher on Fields. But to me, I think that this is a pretty large tier. Like, after Derek Carr, like you said, there's a cutoff. And I think, like, to me, 15 through 22 is almost just a big tier of, like, the last guys that I would consider viable to be part of 2 quarterback builds. I think if you miss after, like, Goff and Jones, which to me is the cutoff, and Matt Ryan, Jameis Winston types, and then you get to this next tier of guys like Wilson and Mac Jones and Ryan Tannehill, then I think you're sort of locked into a 3 quarterback build because those guys are just going to be so inconsistent. I think Jones definitely has the ceiling just based off what you said as a rusher and the improved offensive environment and the coaching upgrades. So I agree with Daniel Jones being in the same tier of guys. Are you buying the Trevor Lawrence bounce back? We both have him ranked as our quarterback 18. He's kind of an interesting figure. We're right in line with ADP as quarterback 18. So I guess, sort of the potential for a year 2 bounce back.
Yeah, I think Trevor can definitely bounce back. And obviously having Urban Meyer as your coach year 1 hurts. But the Jaguars definitely made some questionable moves in free agency. Like, I don't really think they got better as a team, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. Is they didn't get better, they just got different. But Doug Peterson obviously coming in should be an upgrade for Trevor Lawrence and just the Jags offense in general, but I still think that the Jaguars being a bad team is more likely than not. I think that's just I think that's just the range of I think the range of outcomes with this Jags team is just super wide, and there's a good chance, especially with the new head coach coming in, new offensive system, new playbook, that he could potentially struggle again. But obviously his ceiling is sky high, and just the kind of player he is, generational talent, by all accounts coming out of Clemson. You still want to be in on him, especially if we get rid of last year. But I think that there's definitely a good probability that this Jaguars team is just not good once again, which could hurt the overall upside of Trevor Lawrence. And that's just kind of my thing with some of these guys and how I ranked these next 10 or so quarterbacks, is really just their situations and which situations I think will be more fantasy friendly than not. So that's why I have Tua ahead of these guys in this tier, just because his situation is pretty great. And then I think Daniel Jones has the second best situation. And then Trevor Lawrence I have above Justin Fields. So I was just ranking pretty much based on situation and not talent alone. So that's kind of my thought process with this tier of guys.
Yep, that's fair. I think that our last major disagreement in rankings is Jared Goff, who I've got at 21, you've got at 25. So we're essentially having Goff in different tiers. And I think, to me, this just goes down to situation where I think the Lions have one of the better pass catching groups in the NFL. You know, DJ Chark, Jamison Williams, TJ Hawkinson, DeAndre Swift, Amon-Ra St. Brown. If Goff can be just a little bit more efficient and good at getting the ball into his playmakers' hands, I think that there's definitely room for Goff to have more success this year. They didn't bring in any competition. It's going to be another full year of Jared Goff. Their defense was absolutely horrible last year, and they did very little besides draft Aiden Hutchinson to, make an improvement. Is Aiden Hutchinson alone going to be able to shift them from having the worst red zone defense in the league, where they're allowing touchdowns on 70% of their offensive or on their defensive red zone trips, where they had one of the bottom 5 worst third down defenses in the league, just letting teams march up and down the field and then get success and score? I don't know. So I think it's going to be a team with a bad defense and an absolutely loaded offense and a guy in Jared Goff who is not going to do it on his own, but if he distributes the ball well and these playmakers work out, if Amon-Ra St. Brown stays hot, and if Jamison Williams comes in and can be what he is, or what we hope he can be, then I just think there's hope for Jared Goff.
Yeah, I definitely agree for sure. And maybe quarterback 25 is too low. The expert consensus has him as the quarterback 26. So, I mean, technically I am a little higher than the consensus on Jared Goff. But I think ultimately what I believe Jared Goff is a game manager. He's been in great situations before with the Rams, right, where he had Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Todd Gurley, Gerald Everett, and he still wasn't a great fantasy quarterback, right? He's just going to be a guy where if he plays the whole season, he's going to get you like 250, 260 total points. He's shown that in his career. He only has 1 year where he scored above 300 total points, and obviously that was the Rams. That was the Rams year, right? And that was in 2018. Had a very good year, scored 310 points. But other than that, he's a 250, 260 type of guy, which kind of averages out to around 14 to 15 fantasy points per game. And I just think that's the player he is. I just think that he's not the most talented guy. He's not the worst guy, but he's just not going to provide you that ceiling that you want in best ball. It's honestly just that simple. It really doesn't matter about the situation for Jared Goff. He's just not that guy. And sometimes you have to just factor in talent when you're making rankings. And Jared Goff I'm sorry, he's just not that guy. There's a lot of quarterbacks that fit in this mold, so I don't just want to single out him, but I just don't think he's a starting quarterback in the NFL.
I think that, talent-wise, he's probably in the same group as everybody else in this tier, like Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Ryan Tannehill.
I'm taking all of them above Jared Goff, just if we're talking quarterbacks, but
potentially. Yeah, potentially. But I think that the situation that he's in is far and away the best, just from a skill group standpoint. So it wouldn't shock me to see Goff, I don't think he's going to be top 12, but I could see him finishing as QB 15, which would be 10 spots ahead of his ADP and definitely ahead of some of these other guys. even
Yeah.
significantly more talented quarterbacks, guys like Matt Ryan, for example, just because he's going to be on such a run-heavy team. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Goff out.
I will say I think there's unequivocally no shot he finishes as a top 15 quarterback in fantasy football. I will say that. There's just no chance. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. Literally zero chance. But I get where you're coming from.
I guess we'll see. Maybe that's my Lions bias.
Yeah, no, he's finishing 20 plus at least. So
I have Deshaun Watson ranked 23rd, right after Daniel Jones and right before the tier of guys that I have very little interest in. You didn't rank Deshaun Watson. Where is he for you? Are you just sort of, in like a holding pattern with Watson, or what are your thoughts on?
yeah, I just think it's hard to rank a player that's kind of in limbo right now. The ECR has him as the quarterback 28, so you would be a little bit higher on him. I just don't know how you can rank him right now, personally, without news of the suspension. And even if he, let's say, was suspended for half the season, I still don't know where he would fit into these rankings. Maybe around the range that you have him, just in this tier. I don't know what specific number I would have him at, but I'm definitely taking guys like Zach Wilson and Mac Jones and Ryan Tannehill and Davis Mills above Deshaun Watson, just like guys that I know, if healthy, are going to play 17 games and give me a full season. So I would just have him in the tier of quarterbacks that are not going to play 17 games. And that's the tier of Deshaun Watson, Mariota, Trubisky, Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, Geno Smith. I think you have to have him in that tier because he fits the mold of all of those quarterbacks, just in terms of situation.
Does he fit the mold, though? Because those guys are guys who are going to not play 17 games, and for the 8 games that they do play, they're probably going to average like 15 points per game. Like, if Watson plays 8 games, like, yes, he's definitely missing a significant portion of the season, but he could come in and be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, which is why I think that he deserves to be well ahead of these guys. The way I looked at it is like there's a certain level of production that I think you need to have for 17 games that's still valuable, and I think that guys like Wilson and Mac Jones and Wentz don't have it to the point where like the potential for top 5, top 10 production down the stretch is worth it with Watson, because his weekly ceiling is just so much higher than these other guys like Wilson and Jones and Wentz.
No.
So
100%.
Looking at it, where like the risk and reward is good. Like I think that if you're drafting Zach Wilson and Mac Jones, you're in a 3 quarterback build, and if you're in a 3 quarterback build, you can afford to take the extra risk.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think he's worth a pick right now at his current ADP on Underdog and drafters and whatnot, and especially on these sites with 20 rounds. Yeah, I'm all for taking a shot on Deshaun Watson at an ADP of 205, but this is a rankings show, a rankings debate. We're not really we're kind of integrating it into best ball and whatnot, but if we're just specifically talking about rankings, you can't have him that high just because he's not going to play a full season, right? If we give him 8 games of play, averaging 22 points, that's 176 total points on the year. Last year, that would have put him as the quarterback 27. He's only averaged over 22 points one time in his season, or one time in his career. So that's just kind of giving him that median outcome through those 8 games. So I just don't really see how you can rank him higher if we know he's not going to play a full season. And that's why I would have him in the tier of guys that I just know aren't going to give me a full season. Are they still good draft picks in best ball? Absolutely, because these guys like Watson and maybe like Mariota or Trubisky can definitely have ceiling games. We've seen it before in their careers for sure. And Watson, just in terms of how it integrates into best ball, that's a whole different conversation. But just for ranking purposes, I don't think you can have him as high as you have him.
I guess that's sort of where we differentiate in our process for rankings. Like, to me, these are the rankings at which point I'm taking these guys in a draft. Like, I'm not necessarily projecting Deshaun Watson to finish as the 23rd best quarterback in fantasy points at the end of the year. I'm projecting Deshaun Watson to be the 23rd best pick you can make in best ball at the quarterback position, because that's the way that I utilize these rankings.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think a lot of people just rank for accuracy, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I think realistically he ends in that quarterback 28 range, quarterback 27 range if suspended for 8 games. But I definitely get where you're coming from, and you're drafting for best ball, and obviously Deshaun Watson has top 5 upside at any out of all of these quarterbacks. So,
and that.
So, yeah, I mean, no, you can go.
And that's really where like our rankings differ for the rest of the point, and it's not a huge difference, but there are just guys that I have ranked that you don't. For example, I have Baker Mayfield ranked at 29 ahead of guys like Trubisky and Mariota. I think that Baker Mayfield is playing a full season this year as a starter. I don't know if it's going to be for the Seahawks or the Panthers, but I think it's going to be for one of them. And I think that, Baker's actually pretty undervalued right now, because I think both of those could be decent situations for him. And I would take that potential over guys like Trubisky and Mariota, who have a 6 to 8 game, expected starting before they get benched for being who they are. Like, I just don't see it for guys like that. So to me, like, Trubisky and Mariota would be the last ranked guys that I have at 31 and 32, and I would be taking shots on guys like Baker and even Kenny Pickett ahead of them, just for potential.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair for sure. I thought about just including them and going a little bit past 32, but I just kind of wanted to just rank the starting quarterbacks or the quarterbacks that I think are going to start week 1. But I could definitely see Seattle trading for Mayfield. Obviously, we still have 2 months until the season starts, so a lot of news will potentially happen, and these rankings will shift. So maybe we'll have to do an updated version later in the off season. But as it goes for early rankings, I was really just basing mine off who I believe is the starter right now. But I definitely don't mind Mayfield at all, and he's the quarterback 31 in the consensus ranking. So I think you're more in line with that than I am, for sure.
And again, going back to best ball, I think one of the more valuable things is getting guys with ownership discounts, and most of these guys are getting drafted, especially in 20-teamers. But on Underdog, if you're in an 18-round draft, Baker Mayfield is a guy who could start an entire season and is not getting drafted in every draft. Kenny Pickett is a guy who I could see starting from, say after the Steelers bye, so like week 10 on, and have some rushing upside with elite weapons on his offense that is not getting drafted in every draft. So again, my rankings are so specifically curtailed to best ball and things that I think are valuable, like, being able to play in the playoff weeks at low ownership. So that's why I'm definitely targeting guys like Baker and Pickett and Watson over guys like Trubisky and Wentz and Mariota, who I just don't really see having any type of upside, even if they finish higher at the end of the year, just based on having a surefire 17-game schedule. So I guess that's just like my philosophical difference in terms of rankings, but I think for the most part we're relatively in lockstep with this bottom tier of quarterbacks. It's just relatively uninteresting guys. A couple of them you can make a case for, but really these are like third quarterback types to fill out bye weeks and guys that you just need to get by.
I'm just really as a drafter, I'm just looking to never be in this tier. And that's obviously a whole nother discussion with best ball strategy at each position or whatnot. But I'm just looking to get two top guys, two guys from the top 3 or 4 tiers, and call it a day, and not even have to worry about whether or not Jared Goff or Mariota or Davis Mills is the correct pick for your specific team. So I'm just trying to avoid these guys at all costs. But obviously, we got to talk about them. They're starting quarterbacks in the NFL. But yeah, these guys just suck at the end of the day. So
yeah, I think that you're way better off getting 2 guys from the top 20 and fading this, bottom quarterback 20 through 32 entirely, and focusing on, getting your late round running back shots, your late round wide receiver shots, stacking up tight ends, etc. So pretty self-explanatory there. I think that was a good ranking show. We will have our full rankings exclusively in our Discord. If you guys want to check that out, you can find the link in the show notes to the podcast. And that is going to be it for episode 227 of the DFS Dose podcast. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at the DFS Dose, as well as our personal Twitters. I'm at Ben Harvard, Joey's at Joey Carrion DFS. We'll be back with a running back edition of this show next week. If you guys want to connect with us and stay up to date with what's going on in the podcast and join the inner circle, like I said, our free Discord channel is open to everybody. You can join that in the show notes to the podcast. To everybody listening out there, we appreciate you. We value you. Until next time, let's stay accountable and keep it authentic. Vibes.